Hello, everyone. Happy to have you here on this Wednesday afternoon. Whatever you are, it might be day, it might be night, but you're up for a really fun and, as far as I'm responsible for it, informal conversation about roadmaps. I was telling my fellow panelists a few minutes ago that this is one of my favorite topics. It's often very like hard to have these conversations between product and engineering, but I'm hoping today we'll see a really nice discussion. I would love to have you guys have learned as much as possible from these two excellent panelists we have here. I'll give them a couple minutes to introduce themselves in a few, right after me. So my name is Bruno Cotto. I'm a product manager at Aptopia. We're a mobile competitive intelligence company, Boston-based. We offer uh, performance estimates, ad intelligence, review intelligence, all kinds of mobile data. And I joined the company a few months ago. It's been a really nice experience. I did product for three-ish years before that, and I just recently moved to Boston. So it's going to be a really good discussion. I would like to have Sanjeev introduce yourself first, and then McAlvin after Sanjeev, please.
Hey there, Sanjeev Banerjee. I'm the head of engineering at Notarize, day 8 at Notarize. What Notarize does is remote online notarization, and a lot of industries tied to that around insurance, retirement, mortgages, etc. My background is working in venture-backed startups in Boston for quite a while now. I spent a good bit of time at Endeca, where the founders of Toast and Salsify came from, and I also used to run engineering at BitSite. Love all things related to kind of product and roadmaps and how to build them. So looking forward to a great discussion on this topic.
Hey everyone, my name is McAlvin. I am head of products at Lantern. Lantern is a plug and play cannabis e-com delivery platform powered by the same technology that powers Drizzly, which is a leader in alcohol delivery. We're bringing delivery, e-com, deep integrations experience to power kind of the best marketplace experiences in the cannabis sector. Is what we're doing on the Lantern side. So previously, I was working in strategy consulting as well as products. So definitely bringing more of like a blended business and product focus into my current role. I'm looking forward to this chat.
Nice. Thank you guys for the introductions. So I would like to kick us off touching product vision. So if you don't mind, McAlvin, I would like to hear your thoughts on, from your experience, what you think is the most effective way to determine your product's vision. So how do you pick what's the best direction to go with your product?
Yeah, great question, Bruno. So I think the product vision is one of the things that is definitely driven part of that global vision. So the global vision is something that we typically like to determine ahead of time. It's one of like our north star, so to speak, when really understanding where the business is going to go. It's kind of the outcome of the organization and how that's structured. And so we want to make sure, at least at Lantern, what we really want to do is try to bring as much transparency, equity, and access to cannabis, and making sure that we're confidently exploring options to cast as much light to the industry as well as like options for the users. And so with that being the North Star for Lantern, the way I view the product vision for us is really about making sure that everything that we're building is about guiding our users through the journey of deciding what is the right product for them and making sure that it allows them to be able to buy that locally from retailers as part of our real strong focus on social equity, as well as being able to support local businesses. And so that larger global focus is around bringing that transparency is a larger vision across the entire sector, but the product vision is how do we implement that piece into the product and focus it for our customer bases. And so that's kind of how I build upon that is really about looking at the global vision and then finding ways to augment that for the product.
Awesome. So I feel like we're talking here about cannabis, which is a pretty recent industry that has started, and there's a bunch of startups starting to explore it. And on the other hand, we have Sanjeev working at the first online notary service. So I think you're both exploring new waters. So not a lot going on in there in terms of other startups, other examples, comparables, things you can look at and see what was most effective. So I think my follow-up question to you is, you as a product leader, how do you think to yourself that that is the right direction to go? So a lot of times it's not black and white, it's not like a clear answer,
Mm.
but I really like this t-shirt, and I picked it intentionally. It's something that we do a lot of at Topia, like data is more than opinion, but in such new fields such as what you guys work with, how do you get yourself to have confidence, the kind of confidence that you can pass through your whole team that this is the right direction? Is that
Yeah.
is that based on research or anything? Like, what was kind of your process, if you don't mind?
I could maybe try to complement what Calvin said and jump in. As you observed, Bruno, there are a lot of similarities. And in fact, the way McCalvin articulated it so well is very similar to how at Notarize we think about it, in our CEO in particular, and that you're going into this new world. It's somewhat iPhone-like, to use a very poor man's analogy, of no one really knows per se that they want it, but we feel there's a demand. So we try to balance both qualitative and quantitative. And the quantitative comes down to use cases. And for us, there were some intuitions that the company explored early on, namely around real estate, to see, can we get traction here? Can we get, there's this notion of kind of, MVPs, but ours was more about, at that time, more about minimum testable product, if you will, right? Can we get feedback? Is there traction? Is there interest? So data at that time isn't about number of users per se, because the amount of data you have is very, very minuscule. It's early days in a new space. So what we try to do is make as many educated guesses as we could, and also talk to other potential stakeholders, others who are in the niches we were exploring, to see, like, where is the pain? What is an existing jobs people have to do that we can augment, that we can make more efficient, that we can save money or expedite. So, kind of a poor man's answer of, there wasn't a lot of data, so you have to make decisions based on a modest amount. But talking to a broader set of people, you at least get a broad set of inputs, if not numbers that say revenue is here, customers are here.
Yeah, awesome. And a lot of times I think that kind of feeling and that understanding of the market comes from senior leadership. So it would either come from a founder or co-founder, or the heads of product, the heads of engineering are usually people very knowledgeable in startups in terms of setting those directions. And I totally agree with what you said. I just really wanted to provoke this discussion around, like, sometimes there's no data. The field is so unexplored. And I think one of the biggest challenges we see a lot of times around the product vision is, like, you have this vision, you did the best you could with the research. Sometimes it's quantitative, sometimes it's qualitative. But at some point, you have that vision defined, like McCalvin was describing an intern's vision. And then you have to start sharing that vision with the team, and you have to get that into the form of sometimes a physical roadmap, something that is actionable and that is what people will use to work on their day-to-day. So I would like to transition a little bit towards this topic. So Sanjeev, you mentioned something about listening to stakeholders. So that means that it's the part of the process where you're sharing the vision and you're getting feedback from them. So is there any particular experience where you were going through this process, talking to your stakeholders, and then you possibly failed to get feedback from a team, or you missed some piece of information that later in the development of your product came back to you as an issue?
Yeah, certainly. I wish I could say there was only one example, but I have a rich set of examples. I'll pull from one in particular. When I was at BitSite, we were launching a new product, and we had a great conviction that this product would something that people didn't know they wanted yet, customers of ours didn't know they wanted, but that it would be really well received. And so we really prioritized this kind of notion of let's get something out there, get feedback on it early, and then iterate. An MVP, MTP type of mindset. And it was very engineering driven. The product itself was kind of very technical engineering centric. The mistake that we made was we talked to a lot of people internally, the go-to-market team, sales, et cetera. We didn't engage with design though. And we had a fairly small design team, but it wasn't that. It was, we really neglected and thought, it's fine, we'll be fine. Then that didn't work well at all. It was a very subpar user experience, and there was very little uptake or adoption of it. And we weren't looking for revenue per se, but for people to use it. We were looking at things like logins and what pages people were looking at, and we found they simply just didn't engage with the product. So there's an internal stakeholder, but what I learned from that is a very important one, is that I'm an engineer, I'm used to building things, typically back-end things, but that's not where the world centers. The world is more expansive than that. And by not listening to that, it actually, I'd say, set back the kind of adoption of that product in the market probably by a couple of years. So pretty big, I think of that as a pretty big mistake on our part.
Yep, that makes sense. McAlvin, do you have any similar experience or thoughts on what Sanjeev just shared?
Yeah, I think so. I think going through the product process, getting customer feedback and internal feedback, that I've kind of been in many different, experiences where, depending on the role, your ability to get customer data is sometimes something that you crave because you're really trying to shape the product. But oftentimes there are instances where customers are not thinking, are not able to see the vision of like where they actually need to anticipate it in time for us to actually build it. And so there's this anticipation piece that you have to leverage the data to really kind of inform the strategy of what are users doing or not getting out of your product that we can infer to then present those ideas. And then at that point, we're sharing that. I've been at Lantern now for about 6 months now. So I think a lot of my examples will probably come off of that just based on some recency of how fresh these examples are. But I think one of the key things that we've seen and challenges that we've seen on the Lantern side is the cannabis industry is not a new industry by any means. What I can say is relatively new is just the change or transition from folks being really focused in and buying an in-store experience, or even just like, from their neighborhood dealer, to moving to a more traditional, dispensary focused purchase. But then also now with COVID changing so much of people's purchasing habits and their behaviors, there's such a larger driven focus on this delivery experience that now folks are trying to understand, or customers are trying to understand and envision what their purchasing behavior or habits will look like when they're no longer being tended to by a bud tender or someone with the in-store experience, providing them and guiding them and educating them on the product that's right for them. And how do we translate that into an online experience? And I think so much of that is the learning piece of us, really putting together a product. There is, the data to this point is pretty nascent, as you kind of called out, Bruno, for both our industries. And so as far as being able to understand exactly what customers want for the best experience, a lot of customers have not even imagined buying, for example, cannabis in this way. So a lot of what we're doing is building on a product that's providing as much parity to their existing solution, just so they do not feel like they're taking a step back, and then allowing ourselves time to think a couple steps forward and innovate ways that we can improve that purchasing behavior, and also leverage the data that we have to almost build upon what they have from their in-store experience. And in many ways with the retailers that we're working with, trying to find ways to build out an incorporated omni-channel experience that not only serves us at Lantern, but also actually boosts their ability to convert users or engage users in ways that they're able to leverage our platform, but also be able to have an experience that is pretty dynamic and connected to their neighborhood retailer.
That's awesome. So beyond just building a product that enables this whole recent digital experience for acquiring the cannabis, you're also creating a platform. So you have a very strong business. I know you completed your MBA recently, so I did as well. So when you're looking at this kind of business, it's growing somewhat into different directions, you could see. So in your organization, how strong is the pressure pulling from each side? So And when you're talking about vision, how do you try to balance those incentives into becoming more of a platform or becoming more of a brand of your own? Is there something you can share around it?
Yeah, I think it's super interesting. And the funniest part about this is when I was going through the process of learning about Lantern before joining the team, the idea of what the product vision is I was like going through the interview process and we're ideating around, if I were to join, where do I think Lantern would go? The real focus around what customers wanted was entirely different pre-COVID. The idea of trying to imagine a world where folks felt comfortable enough, felt like they had the right information, to purchase online was something that a lot of folks, we knew there was going to be a decent amount of education that would need to be there. But when COVID happened, at this point, the demand is so high that the need for education from a customer perspective, like that's not there. At that point, they're solely looking at us as a means of utility. A lot of the retailers are saying, we need a turnkey solution. We need to be able to stand up delivery right away. So from our immediate focus of like me going through the interview process and me talking about where we're going to start potentially before joining, it went from building out a way for users to imagine or end users to imagine purchasing products online to, all right, let's find ways to make sure that they're not losing anything with their existing experience. And so a lot of that customer focus went from education, being customer focused, super ambitious, but grounded in reality, and our differentiated value prop being super convenience, from all of a sudden to customer focus is making sure that they're able to get their product at all because they cannot go to the stores. Ambitious is like at this point really focusing on just making sure that we're satisfying the need and demand. And then the differentiated value prop is the fact that customers are not able to go into the stores or at least do so in a really safe way. So providing a touchless opportunity or at least avenue and channel to be able to make their purchase is where the real value is. And so what we really want to make sure to do at this point is change and cater the roadmap to make sure that folks are able to get that parity, get the accurate product. And then when we're able to like educate users, that is completely secondary up to this point because in this very moment, the idea or need to transition from going to in-store to delivery, like we don't have to do that work for us. Unfortunately, with what's going on, that everyone's mindset has already adopted that and they're welcoming the opportunity.
That's awesome.
Bruno, could I jump in for a second? A few things
Of
that
course.
Calvin said really highlight some of the similarities in that we're in new industries, right? And the COVID effect on us has also been very similar. We have to evangelize less. Business has come into us. That's a great thing. And there's another piece tying back to kind of company vision versus product vision. When company vision, when you're in a new industry, you're really championing something brand new. It's very qualitative. And it can be really useful to kind of be in the same physical space. And Notarize has an office in Boston, and most people are in the same physical space. We are not now. And so you don't have that day-to-day drumbeat of hearing from your CEO, and ours, Pat, is the visionary. He truly is. We don't see that as much. We don't hear that as much. So I think it causes us to have to up our game, if you will, to oversimplify it, to speak to it crisply, to map it to concrete things on a product roadmap as well.
And Sanjeev, thank you so much. That's the perfect segue. So I want to stick with you for another question. So as far as I've seen in your experience, you've been working mostly focused on the engineering side. So what have you seen from your startup experience as being the most successful ways the product organization can work with the engineering organization to bring that vision into a roadmap reality? A series of epics and user stories or tasks or whatever kind of work unit your team is working with. What has been the most effective way you've seen this happen in your experience?
Yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot recently as I've joined a new company and forming the relationships, et cetera, is that there are some mechanical pieces that I think are extremely important or extremely useful. Everyone and their mother uses Jira. And so organizing your work and kind of setting up what your ground rules are, like those are useful. Those are, I'd say, necessary. But above that are really qualitative discussions around what do we think our goals are. So, I'll cut to the chase. I think what's been tremendously useful is to use a goal setting system like OKRs, or you could pick something else. But I found that to be pretty transformative, both in a at a functional level, say within engineering, but where it's really powerful is when you do it cross-function with product, with go-to-market as well, where you go, we want to reduce churn in the second half of the year. Okay, what does that mean? We got to do things in the first half to hit the renewals in the second half. So conversations, kind of these cross-functional conversations to get real clarity on what your business goals are, and use metrics. Like, don't be afraid to use metrics. Don't make it all touchy-feely. We want to be the best, blah, blah, blah. Okay, map that to what? You know, is your margin going to increase? Is your customer count going to increase? Is your top line going to increase? So kind of being metric driven, having lots of conversations and mapping it to durable goals. And of course, transparency that all can see. Like, that's vital. Everyone has to be able to see this. They don't have to all like make the sausage together. That's probably too many people in the conversation, but highlight exactly what you're doing and use metrics and let everyone see it.
Awesome. Now, I want to switch it back to Calvin. So I have an engineering background, so I think Sanjeev, I couldn't agree more with you. It's just amazing to have the roadmap with all the metrics and everything straightforward. Every time I talk to my engineers, they're always looking for this kind of signal. What is my success criteria? What are the precise requirements? How do I define success for this? And then it comes the flip side of the coin, the product side, which is in a lot of times, and which I've experienced more recently, seeing demand changes, design changes, needs getting a better, slightly different understanding. And sometimes those goals are not as clear. So let's say McAlvin still had to test for understanding and getting people to be educated about something. Those are not as clear-cut metrics as the engineering side would hope and expect. So McAlvin, could you give us a little bit of your perspective on the product side of turning vision into roadmap?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question. I think it definitely varies. It definitely varies by industry, just because there's going to be certain things that are pretty dynamic. Within my industry, my roadmap, and I definitely do not hold anything back. I'm 100% transparent with the way I'm managing roadmap, and given that the regulatory environment of cannabis is changing so often, it varies by state. The roadmap evolves. So the roadmap evolves by market, business, and based on the regulatory changes. And so with that, what we try to do is really focus in on, given that we're rather early stage, we're trying to make sure that we're taking care of kind of the bread and butter tools and functionality that are going to be global. So when we're thinking about that, one of the key things, for example, if we're talking about making sure that users are able to get through the order flow successfully and make sure that they're able to manage a transaction and we're able to track that data and make sure we're pushing the right information via an integration over to a retailer's POS. The success criteria of that being, is an order accurately being placed? Are we able to track it? Are we getting it done in a timely manner? Like, that is something that we can define as something that needs to be done. A secondary thing could be, all right, building out a discounts engine where we're able to bring in discounts or CRM elements. I think when we start getting into some of the more nuanced, incremental, value-added features, that's where we want to be really focused in on where some of the matrices are happening. And so a great example of that could be design flows around what is going to increase user engagement, what things or features do we think are going to change customer habits or behaviors around how they're engaging with content on the site. Those are things that are less quantitatively, you can't avoid those using the data. You're going to want to measure the baseline, make sure you're doing some testing and engage how different designs are being interacted with customers. Whereas some of the things that are irrefutable and for sure cemented in the roadmap are the things that are going to be necessary for us to gather any useful data. And in our case, is making sure that we can get users in through the flow and making sure that our systems are up and running. As 99 to 100% runtime is a level of success. And so I think that's one of the key things there, and making sure that from an engineering perspective, I love to make sure that I have check-ins with my engineering teams. so that they are understanding hand in hand around what decisions are being put into the roadmap and why, and make sure there's a very coherent story around the growth and direction of the product, so that we're aligned on what the goals are and the benefits are for each decision we're making, and trying to keep that as simple as possible to avoid any ambiguity or confusion when the engineers are looking back at any of the epics and stories that are written out of that roadmap.
Nice. So thanks for sharing that. That's really insightful to hear about like the process you guys are going through at Lantern. And I think a follow-up question on that is, I think you mentioned changes, so roadmap changes and how things move around as regulation change or as just business requirements sometimes change. How do you, as a head of product, absorb those changes, either coming from different stakeholders, from people you have to get feedback, and also how do you keep your partnerships, your check-ins with engineering, communicating those changes?
Yeah, great question. Just from years of experience, one of the key things I've always found to be super helpful is to try to shield my engineering team for as much of those changes or incoming information as much as possible until they're cemented in some sort of document, Jira ticket, or whatever mechanism folks are using. In our case, one of the key things that I have on my team is just making sure that if folks are coming in with any ideas, suggestions, any inputs around features, that they're channeling those or funneling those over back to me, so that I can validate, understand how it fits within the roadmap, have that conversation. And so my job is to make sure that I'm kind of filtering out all the noise and making sure that when things come into the engineering team, there's very clear understanding and direction and how those things align to the goals and benefits that we've outlined as part of our product vision, with my head of tech, and making sure that he is understanding why this decision was made, rather than being inundated and having to make decisions real time based on whatever inputs are coming in. And so as product, I embrace and like encourage folks to give ideas, encourage folks to give feedback. And then my job is making sure that I take that information, take the data, couple that together to provide some useful insights, as well as any compelling changes to the roadmap, making sure that those are communicated with my engineering team before those are impacted on the roadmap. And so my job is making sure that there are no surprises whenever we have roadmap meetings. The idea is if there's any surprises, then there must have been a breakdown in the communication ahead of time.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's really good guidance for startups in general, where like a lot of times there's really small teams, people doing multiple roles, so the team's still being trained, culture is still being developed. So communication is definitely key. And it sounds like you're doing a hell of a job and you're checking with your team. So Sanjeev, back to you. Now, we heard about all the stakeholders. We know everything is coming in. We have our roadmap growing probably faster than we can handle. And you're in an engineering team, you know how fast things are going, not always running as smoothly as we wished. So from your experience, I would like to hear that question. How do you balance new features against improvements that are needed? Sometimes there are functional improvements for some features, but all backlogs and roadmaps have a lot of both. The new features are exciting. There's sometimes a lot of stakeholder pressure around new features, but the improvements are needed. And also your team internally is probably a lot of time talking about technical debt. So there's some things from the technical side that you need to fix. How to balance those priorities and how to communicate and sometimes negotiate that with product. What is your experience around that?
Yeah, well, it's a very emotional topic. It's a very contentious topic typically. The things that I've found that really help are, I'll kind of refer to what I was saying earlier, like having shared goals and having shared business goals in particular. And so to make it a little bit more concrete, sometimes you want to grow your top line revenue. That's about new widgets, new things to sell. On the other hand, sometimes you also want to keep your churn high, or actually, no, you want to keep your retention high or increase it. And that's often about investing in what you have already. Maybe it's more improvements. And then around the areas of kind of engineering driven investment, be it tech debt or it's time to re-platform, whatever that is, that often, again, it depends, that can be about nothing that is immediate, but something setting you up for the longer term. Maybe handling an order, an order of magnitude more customers, or going into another geo like Europe or something. So what I found that helps quite a bit is, instead of making this an engineering internal decision, which it should never be, is to have alignment, not just with product, but with other functional leaders captured into broader company goals. And again, OKRs are a way to do it. It's not the only one. So I don't want us to, I don't want you to leave going like Sanjeev is selling OKR software tomorrow. That's not the case. But having these top line objectives, and then the KRs, which are concrete and specific and measurable and time bound, I found that that helps to take some of the emotion and what seems like subjectivity out of it, because you're orienting around one North Star. I hope that's useful.
Yeah, that is very useful. So thanks for sharing that. So we got a pretty tough question here on the chat. I want to take a break. We're like half an hour in. I think it's a good time for the tough question. So to both of you, whoever wants to chime in first. Marty Kagan, foremost product thought leader, says that product roadmaps are a waste of time. What do you guys think about it? Is it time for us to rethink roadmaps entirely? Are you familiar with this statement or not? Even if you're not, what are your thoughts on it?
McAlvin, who's gonna take it first? This is a good topic.
I'll let you take the swing at it first.
Okay, I'll take my first swing. So I think I'm familiar with Marty Kagan. I work with some people who are adherents of his. I think the way he presents it is almost as, if you will, a religious argument. You have to be on one side or the other, and I am not. So I think that roadmaps they're guides. They are not something that it's not the 10 Commandments where you're etching it in stone. I think roadmaps have really practical benefits of letting internally and also your customers know what is coming. If you're a startup, often, and particularly if you're a B2B startup, larger companies, you want them to buy your product. They want to know that they can invest in you. You're not going to be going away. You want to get more money from them. So it's not actually good enough to go, you know what, we're very agile and we'll let you know what we're doing next quarter. So I think they're just pragmatic benefits to being able to kind of shine a light as to where you intend to go while maintaining latitude, right? Like you have to be truly nimble. So I'm, I guess, more of a centrist in this. I don't know that roadmaps, the way he speaks of them, are as relevant today, in fact. I think there's a lot of value in kind of saying, hey, here's directionally where we're going, and writing that down and sharing it. So I'll stop there. I'm eager to hear McAlvin's take on this.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not that far off from you at all, actually. I was going to say at least the idea that they're a waste of time. I could say that some roadmaps can be a waste of time. I think ideally the way I look at it is, if you're truly being, operating in a true business fashion, I think the roadmaps that are very concrete and cemented around, like, this is what we plan to do for the next year and a half, and spending a ton of time baking out exactly what the org or an entire product is going to look like, a year and a half out. I think that exercise can be a bit of a waste of time. And what it actually does is kind of incentivize and promote the idea of working, kind of in one funnel, and not really thinking outside a broader set of data, insights, customer input, things of that nature. And so I've seen some roadmaps that look like that. And in many cases, I could look at that as not being like an ideal use of time. However, I definitely think, having a roadmap that is flexible and dynamic to be able to absorb new information as they arise is the more, central model of a roadmap that I tend to subscribe to, and one that I think is a good balance of adequate planning and strategy, while also being open-minded enough to be able to pivot where necessary as the business and customers need to go.
Bruno, could I chime in with one thing? I happen to Google Marty Kagan roadmaps, because I've lived in the world, but I haven't read much about it. And so just, one article, I'll put the link in later. He essentially talks about roadmaps that are bad. They tell the team what to do. They're prescriptive. And I think what McAlvin and I think are saying, the sentiment we share is, it's not prescriptive, saying build X. It's more about this kind of outcome in this kind of time frame, with the caveat of like, we may change our minds based on new information. So I don't know that the way McAlvin and I are thinking about roadmaps are radically different from what he's saying, while still saying, hey, there might be value in saying like, here's the path that we currently intend to traverse. So, and I'll put the link in if people are curious.
Yes. So we had a follow-up question about product roadmaps here. I think it's centered around communicating product roadmaps to investors. So I think this is a different perspective. We touched on communicating roadmaps to customers or internal stakeholders, how to manage that. But as head of product and head of engineering, how have you guys managed communicating roadmaps to investors? So when you're having the conversation, how much of your direction do you want to communicate, or how much of your roadmap can be targeted to a specific investor? Is that a real thing or not?
I'll say in my experience, it's a real thing, but it varies quite a bit. It's extremely case by case and bespoke. And it's not as though I have decades of experience, but I'm thinking kind of board meetings and during raises and during diligence. What I've personally seen, that it's less about roadmaps, it's much more about markets and TAMs and kind of the big things you're going to do there, as opposed to what is your sequence of things. I've rarely, now again, I'm engineering, right? I'm not the product person, but we're typically in the same room fielding the same question. But it's much less about like, tell me your sequence. It's more of, what are the big kinds of things you think you need to build? You know, what's the outcome you think you need to get to? To make it a little bit more concrete, a contrived example for Notarize could be that, you know, we want to enable all a fully online real estate transaction in the lower 48 by the end of 2022. Like, that could be one. That's quite different from saying in Q1 of next year, we will ensure that Alaska can use countrywide. I think it went on business, but Bank of America to do mortgage. That's too specific. And I've not seen boards or investors care about that. They could care much more about the bigger things and to go, you know, are you thinking big enough yet not just dreaming, if you will?
Got it. McAlvin, anything you want to add to that?
I mean, I would echo everything he just said. I think it largely, largely the conversations are focused around opportunities and what opportunities and any threats that are happening to the business, and making sure that we're attacking problems. So it's really focused on problem and problem solving rather than understanding the roadmap for the sake of just having context. It's more so, what are we addressing? Are we on top of that? Is there a game plan to take advantage of this opportunity, or to make sure that we aren't being impacted in any way that might arise throughout the life of the business?
You know, Bruno, can I add one thing? Because McCallum, you're saying spark one thing, is what I've personally seen is it's less about, do you have the right answer right now? It's about the meta of, there are going to be some unknowns. Or is the way you think about it, they're kind of judging how you think. They want to understand that, as opposed to just your answer for the test of the day.
Got it. That makes sense. So switching back to our topics of our discussion that we had planned originally here, there's another question that seems to be a good segue to our previous discussion. How much of your roadmap, what is in front of you, is focused on this month or the next immediate questions, or on the horizon? So I think the question behind this, if I got it right, is like, should your roadmap be more focused on the short-term priorities, or should you work on your roadmap, making sure there's some flexibility, but accommodating for the priorities or the projects you were looking to work on over the next year or a couple of years? So what is the right length for a roadmap, if there's a right length?
Yeah, I can chime in to start here. I think it's extremely context dependent. So I think some invariance here. So if you're in a market that you've got some visibility into what's going to be needed, then you can plan for beyond a quarter or two. So let's say it's 12 to 18 months out. And I would say the way I view it is that there is one thing, it is the roadmap that captures the work, the degree of certainty around it, it's much better known closer in. Those can be tickets that are scoped, have a design, have all the inputs you need, and a team can actually go against it. Something that's further out may also be in Jira, if that's what you choose to use. It might be in Epic, we have a thing called a business initiative at Notarize. That's kind of a bigger bucket, if you will, than Epic. It's just that there's going to be more unknowns about it, right? So I think of it less as, do you use a roadmap for a month's work or for that? So you can call it all a roadmap. Give it whatever name you like. Because if you're Marty Kagan, you'd call it Map Road or something. It's like there's more certainty about the things near in, and presumably, they kind of address more near in business challenges as well.
Yeah, similar answer, slightly different for us. Given, I'll say in my current role, it's definitely context dependent, as Sanjeev mentioned as well. We go with an approach of leveraging Jira as well, and having this roadmap. In the roadmap is largely focused on some of these bigger ticket items that are going to require larger, robust epics where there's a lot of details, a lot of nuance, a lot of requirements. And then where we won't include some of these shorter term wins or some of these like smaller, quick fix tickets that are, pretty small wins, very functional, and very easy to manage. And so there tends to be a focus on the roadmap when there are things that have a lot of cross-functional value, a lot of things that need to be determined and discussed at large for the company. Whereas some of the, if there's a quick fix to improve efficiency or, site speed, something of that nature, those are things that we would be able to manage internally within our team, incorporate it in our Jira backlog, and bring it into a sprint when the time is right. And that would be something that I would also manage, but will require less focus or buy-in from any other stakeholder, given that those are things that we all need. And so things like bugs do not appear on a roadmap for us unless it's a major infrastructure change and things of that nature. And so it's definitely context dependent, and it's definitely based on the pertinency for everyone to take a look at. As well, I make Jira available to everyone on my team, not just engineering focused. So at any point, if anyone is interested in seeing, what engineers are working on day to day, like they have absolutely, the rights or the admin rights to be able to look at that within the Jira system. So there's no need to list everything. It's more so for the conversation of roadmap and the direction, and making sure that we're working towards that company vision. That roadmap is where that discussion lives. And then for all things that are more smaller and negligible, those are handled in the Jira.
Awesome. I think you touched on, once again, in a very important topic, which is communication. And I wanted to switch to our next topic, which is you have a roadmap. Okay, now it's broken down to several epics or tasks. Again, whatever work units, that's defined and that's communicated to the key stakeholders. So product, engineering, design, business, everyone is aligned around it. And very often we need, as product, as engineering, we need to have a lot more people in the organization aware of what's going on with this roadmap. So how to track progress. So I've heard of several different companies doing in different ways. So some people do Slack integrations. Every ticket that is completed, every new feature creates a Slack message to the whole company. Sometimes it's a weekly report from a product manager or the head of product to the whole company. My question, I think, to you, McCalvin, right now is, what do you think is the best practice in terms of communicating roadmap updates and progress updates? And where do we cross the line between communication to over communication? What is good enough communication and what is too much communication?
Yeah, so I tend to focus a little bit more on making sure that there's over communication, but I provide everyone the opt-in. So what I mean by that is, when it comes to focusing in on the roadmap, that's a discussion where all business stakeholders are invited to that meeting. I will host that once a week. Everyone is aware of it. Engineers will show up just because they want to be able to hear and understand, how the business is talking or communicating about some of the projects that we're going to be working on. Now, as I stated in my earlier comment about the idea of having Jira open and available to everyone on the team, the reason we do that is for folks that want to dig into exactly how the requirements are built out, what the designs are going to look like. They want a sneak peek. That's open and available to them. But what is also important is I also have daily stand-ups with my engineering team, as well as sprint planning with my team, and that's also available to. Given our team is 12 people, it's not a huge undertaking to have everyone in the meeting if we wanted to. But the main focus is all these stakeholders will have interest in any given feature or product update based on what's currently in development or what's in the backlog. So there might be something that a marketing person is super interested in because they're going to help them build out some site tracking. And so for that, if that person wants to get a sense of how that work is going along, then that person has the opportunity to sit into a stand-up. Obviously their focus is just to be a fly on the wall, but they're able to hear the engineer talking through any questions they have, how the progress is going. But also from an over communication perspective, if that's too much information and you just want to find out when it's done, then wait, absolutely feel free to skip that meeting, and I will let you guys know when that feature is set, been tested, vetted, and is ready for you to roll. And so what I try to do is have the opportunity or option to get as much information as you want, so that transparency is there, while also giving the opt-out and flexibility for a company at our stage to avoid requiring a bunch of meetings for these folks to have to sit in to understand what's going on in a given day.
Awesome. Sounds great. So I think one of the few last questions we have here is, I would like to hear, Sanjeev, your perspective on or your experience on, what if a startup, it's a very unusual case, have a shorter backlog, have a shorter roadmap, so not a ton of visibility on the future, what needs to be developed. So and things are changing very often. So let's say there's changing in the environment, changing in demand, whatever is causing a more than normal level of change. How do you, in your experience, have seen that being managed successfully?
Yeah, so
Short visibility, sure. Lots of changes.
Yeah, right. So limited visibility, lots of changes. What I think is helpful there's this question that I first heard about that I think Bessemer Venture Partners says, what do you have to believe? And so because there's lots of unknowns here, you can't rely on data, because the data is just inputs, and the inputs is changing. You can't see beyond your nose. So you've got to figure out, what are some of your convictions? What is it that you think you've got to build, if you will? The way to arrive at that, in my personal experience, has been lots and lots of discussions typically. And you've got to have some people who are truly visionary in there. It helps if there's one, because you can orient around that person. But that's what I've seen actually helps. And sometimes patience. Now, if you really can't see very far out and there's lots of change, you may be in a place where, as a business, you can't be very patient. You've got to be a bit speculative and build something and hope that that's the right direction. And that comes back to kind of, what are the things that you feel like you have to believe in for this to be true, because there is a lack of data, there's a lack of information, and or a high rate of change.
Awesome. So let me just check if we have any questions still pending here, because I would like to get to hear final remarks from both of you. I think we have one specific question here for you, Mike Calvin. So how do you focus? Oh, that's interesting. How do you focus on the product roadmap of a marketplace for your industry versus a last mile delivery product? Are they thought separately? So I think we covered vision and roadmaps a little bit, and we might have touched on this a little earlier, but can you share your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting question, and something that my team we've talked about quite a bit. I think there's a huge emphasis on controlling the product that we have, which is up to this point the site experience, the backend technology as it pertains to the integrations with retailers, as well as making sure that the information is channeled over to the customer post delivery. But there is this last mile delivery, which is the aspect of getting that order from the dispensary, making sure it's accurate and getting it to the end user in a timely manner. From a product perspective, it's very easy for folks to probably consider that the job being done is when that order is successfully received by the retailer, and then the fulfillment piece is handled by them. But the interesting part is, for the way I view it from a product perspective, is for a user that is coming to the Lantern site, the Lantern experience isn't complete until that order arrives to them. It's no difference than Uber Eats or DoorDash or any of these other delivery models. Is if the food is not sent to your house correctly or late, many folks are unable to separate that the order had issues at the time that the restaurant got it versus at the time where you put that order in. So if you have a bad experience that way, there is a chance it'll impact the user's likelihood of wanting to use your product again. And so the roadmap absolutely would incorporate aspects of the last mile delivery where possible. In some instances within in our environment, based on the regulatory aspects, there are going to be some aspects where the control of the customer will probably live with the retailer, given that there's a lot of private information that will need to be owned and controlled by the dispensary. But there's absolutely opportunity to have negotiations and conversate around converse about which aspects of the last mile delivery are owned by us versus owned by the retailer. So as those things are managed through the conversations, through the BD process, or even the account management process, as we kind of put our name next to which aspects of the last mile delivery we'll own, then those pieces are absolutely incorporated into the roadmap. So it could be things such as post-order notifications, or it could be things as mid-order notifications, tracking, things of that nature. And so making sure that we have a mechanism of defining exactly which pieces of the last mile delivery that we own is the first part. And then once we have concrete information there, then incorporating and thinking through what's the best experience for the user, and then building that out would be the third piece.
Right. Yeah, that's essentially what I got from your answers. It depends on how much you care about the user experience, right? Then you want to have more ownership of the process. You want to have more control and close and more feedback cycles throughout the whole process to make sure that your users are having the best possible experience. So that's great advice, and that's great to hear. So we're wrapping up here. I would like to hear from both of you. What is the one or two pieces of advice, that practical advice, very specific things that work for you that you could share with the audience? What is one or two things you can start doing today to have your roadmap be a more effective and a more productive tool for your organization?
I guess I can chime in. I'd say two concrete things. One is if you think of a roadmap and a backlog have some overlap, some similarities. I think grooming it regularly is vital. Even if the rate of change is really low, you should go back and see, are they in the right order? You're keeping it in priority. So groom it regularly. Make sure it has pristine hygiene, and also proactively communicate it out regularly. And I like McAlvin, what you said about the opt-in. I think that's great. There's a lot of information coming in. So let people kind of decide what they want to look at, but proactively push that out. Don't just rely on people to come look at it. I've asked every engineering team that I've been a member of, hey, the backlog lives here, you should look at it. And they're typically busy kind of doing their work, and and it's not for them. But I think proactively communicating. So groom and communicate so that you have transparency. Those are the two concrete tips that I would add.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yeah, I probably have three things that I think are super important for me. I think it's, depending on, actually it's not dependent, it's really for everyone, really tirelessly focusing on the customer experience. And what that means to me is not only focusing on the quantitative data, but also having that qualitative touch point in data as well, and making sure that you're able to use the data to prove out any hypotheses and any insights or takeaways that are driven from the qualitative feedback is something that is super important to help drive great roadmaps. I think thinking about roadmaps like it is a living document, I think Sanjeev kind of alluded to that as well. Just making sure that you are not married to what is on your roadmap, but more so married to the idea of providing the best product vision that is aligning with the global vision. And then I think the third piece, which is kind of a bit that's overlooked, is just making sure that you can tell a coherent story with your roadmap and really be able to tell the story around growth and direction of the product. And then if at any point you're unable to see the coherent strategy of around what story does this roadmap tell, what direction is this product going into, then there's probably some work that needs to be done, not only in the strategy for the roadmap, but also with the communication. Because if you don't have the story for you, then it's going to be very difficult for someone else to grasp that, and much easier to poke holes into the thought process and methodology that went into building out the roadmap.
Fun. That's all great pieces of advice. I would like to give you guys a round of applause, a quick round of applause remotely. This has been a great hour, great conversation. I really appreciate Sanjeev and McAlvey, you both taking the time. Thanks, Anjali, for putting all this together. And to the audience, I really hope you're enjoying Startup Boston 2020. And I'll see you around.